Episode 1. The First Frequency. The signal that calls. There are places in this world where time seems to stand still, places where the air is heavy and every step you take feels like you're disturbing something ancient. For decades, no one had dared venture near the old radio tower on the outskirts of Ravenswood. Its once vibrant signals had long since faded into nothing but static. The rusting tower, a forgotten relic from a time before the internet, had been abandoned, left to decay among the rolling hills and thick forests. But something was stirring, something was waking, and that's when Anna Carter heard the sound. It began like a faint hum in the back of her mind, almost imperceptible, like a whispered tune carried on the wind. Anna, an ambitious young journalist with fascination for all things mysterious, had spent her life chasing stories that no one else dared touch. But this was different. This wasn't just any story. This was a calling. She had been driving to Ravenswood for weeks, intending to write an article about the town's forgotten history, but the abandoned radio tower kept drawing her in. What was it about that place that seemed to echo deep within her soul? The signal she had heard. It wasn't like anything she had ever come across. It wasn't just a radio frequency. It was something alive, pulsing with a strange energy. On the evening she arrived, the sky was overcast, with a low fog settling over the land. The radio tower loomed in the distance, towering over the landscape like a sentinel, watching over the sleeping town. Its once bright lights had dimmed, and its metal frame creaked in the wind, sending shivers down Anna's spine. She approached the tower with caution, the hum in the back of her mind growing louder with every step. It wasn't just a sound now, it was a presence that beckoned her closer. As Anna made her way up the gravel path leading to the tower's entrance, she felt the hairs on the back of her neck rise. The air grew thick, as if something unseen was pressing against her chest, making it hard to breathe. But she pressed on, determined to uncover the source of the strange frequency. Inside the tower, the old equipment was a graveyard of vintage radio gear. Dust and cobwebs covered every surface, and the silence was deafening. Yet, the hum persisted. It seemed to come from within the walls, vibrating through the very structure of the building. Anna approached the main control panel, where a large, old-fashioned radio transmitter sat dormant, its dials and buttons seemingly untouched for decades. But the hum was louder here. She could feel it in her bones, reverberating through her fingertips as she reached out to touch the cold metal. Without thinking, her fingers danced across the dusty dials, turning them absent-mindedly. And then it happened. The signal shifted. A burst of static filled the room, loud enough to make her wince. But then, through the static, she heard it, a voice. Anna. Her heart stopped. The voice was unmistakable. It was her own name. She stepped back, eyes wide in shock. The voice didn't sound like an echo of the past. It sounded like it was coming right now. A voice from the other side of the veil. A voice from somewhere. Anna's breath quickened as she tried to steady herself, but the air around her seemed to grow heavier. The hum intensified, almost unbearable now, as if the walls themselves were alive. The voice returned, this time louder, clearer, more urgent. Anna, listen to me, you're not alone. The transmission sputtered, crackling with static, but the voice continued, growing more distorted with each passing moment. The tower is a bridge, a gateway. You've opened it, and now they're coming. Anna's pulse raced. Her mind spun. What was happening? Who was speaking? What was coming? Before she could react, the radio fell silent. The hum was gone. The air cleared and the room felt strangely still, as though the very world had shifted. But she wasn't alone. A figure stood in the doorway, shrouded in shadow. It was tall, thin, and its features were obscured. Though Anna could feel its presence, it was watching her, her breath caught in her throat. Who was this? What did they want? The figure took a step toward her, and in the instant before Anna could move, a cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing the dim light. The figure was gone. She wasn't sure what had just happened, but one thing was certain. The signal was alive. It was calling to her, and it was calling to something else, something far more sinister. The frequency she had unlocked wasn't just a signal. It was a tear in the fabric of reality itself. And as the night fell over Ravenswood, Anna realized one thing. The town's secrets were far darker than she had ever imagined, and the whispers on the other side were just the beginning. 2. Uncovering the past. The following morning, Anna returned to the tower with a new sense of purpose. She had to uncover the truth behind the voice, the signal, and the chilling presence she had encountered. Her mind raced with questions. How could a radio frequency carry messages from beyond? What had she activated by turning those dials? And most importantly, who was the voice that had spoken her name? She began digging into the town's history, asking around, speaking with the elderly residents who still remembered Ravenswood's darker past. What she uncovered was disturbing, to say the least. In the early 1900s, the tower had been constructed by a group of scientists and engineers, led by Dr. Adrian Blackwell, a brilliant but controversial figure. Blackwell had been obsessed with the idea of communication across dimensions, the belief that sound waves could transcend the physical world and connect with other realms. He had been driven by a desire to unlock the secrets of the universe. But something had gone wrong. Dr. Blackwell and his team had disappeared under mysterious circumstances, their research abandoned and their work erased from history. The tower had remained, a forgotten monument to their failed experiments. But Anna now knew that their work hadn't been forgotten. It had been waiting. As she pieced together the fragmented records, she learned of a theory that chilled her to the bone. The tower wasn't just a communication device. It was a gateway, a portal that connected this world to another, a world where the boundaries between life and death no longer held. And Dr. Blackwell's experiments had torn down the veil between the two. The more Anna dug into the town's past, the more she realized that the curse of Ravenswood had never left. It was still there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for someone to awaken it. And Anna had just done that. Episode 2, The Voices and the Static. A descent into the unseen. Anna woke up with a sense of foreboding, her mind still reeling from the night before. The voice, the figure, the crackling radio, it all seemed like a nightmare that she couldn't escape. She had hoped, even convinced herself, that it had been a trick of her mind. But deep down, she knew the truth. The signal was real. The voices, the whispers, they had a purpose, and they were calling for something more. Sitting up in her bed, Anna glanced at the clock. It was 3 a.m., the hour when the world felt still, the air heavy with secrets. Her mind felt consumed by the haunting whispers of the radio, the message that had been etched into her soul. The signal had been more than just a voice. It had been an invitation, one that she couldn't ignore, no matter how much she tried to push it aside. Pulling on her jacket, she grabbed the worn notebook she had kept her findings in. The pages were filled with scribbled notes, research, and pieces of history that were beginning to form a terrifying puzzle. Every lead she followed seemed to bring her closer to an answer, but every answer only led to more questions. Anna's fingers hovered over the radio equipment on her desk, the very device that had introduced her to the Eerie signal. She had tried turning it off, unplugging it, even covering it with cloth, but the hum, that low-frequency static, always seemed to be there. It wasn't just in the radio, it was in her mind, echoing through her thoughts like an invisible hand. She could feel it now, that tension in the air, like the universe itself was waiting for her to make a choice. There was something she had to understand, something deeper than the signal, than the cursed radio tower. The question was, what was it? 2, the mysterious caller. The next morning, Anna returned to Ravenswood, her heart heavy with an overwhelming sense of urgency. She needed to know more, needed to delve deeper into the origins of the signal and the dark entity that had called her. She drove down the quiet, mist-covered streets, the town looking almost frozen in time, with the weathered buildings lining the streets like ghosts of the past. She headed straight for the local library, hoping to uncover more about Dr. Adrian Blackwell, the man behind the radio tower, whose disappearance seemed to hold the key to everything. The library was quiet as usual, the only sound being the soft shuffle of papers as the librarian worked behind the counter. Anna approached the reference desk and asked about Blackwell's research. The librarian gave her a strange look, as if the question itself was taboo. Dr. Blackwell, the librarian muttered under her breath, her face tightening. You'll find his name in the old records. But I must warn you, Some things are best left unspoken. Anna's curiosity only deepened at the librarian's cryptic words. The warning only served to drive her forward, to push her to uncover the truth hidden in those forgotten pages. The records Anna found were scattered in a dusty corner of the library, buried beneath decades of town history. She sifted through the brittle files, feeling an unease settle in her chest. The more she read about Blackwell, the more she realized just how deep his obsession with the other side went. Dr. Adrian Blackwell had been obsessed with crossing over, breaking the boundary between the living and the dead. He believed that radio waves could act as a bridge to the afterlife, that frequencies could pierce the veil and reach those beyond. But his experiments had been deemed dangerous by the scientific community, and the town had labeled him a madman. Blackwell had gone to great lengths to hide his findings, but Anna's search uncovered the truth. He had succeeded. His experiments had torn the fabric of reality, creating an opening, a gateway through which entities could pass. But the most chilling discovery came at the very end of the records. A final entry, scrawled in Blackwell's handwriting, read, "They are coming. The frequency has been set, and when the door opens, they will be free." Anna felt a cold shiver run down her spine. The signal, the voices, the figure in the radio tower, it all fit together. Blackwell's experiments had worked, but they had opened a doorway, one that should never have been opened. 3. The call of the void. That night, Anna returned to the radio tower, the familiar hum guiding her like a magnet. The tower loomed over her, its rusted metal frame reaching into the night sky, as it were an anchor holding back the unknown. Inside, the radio equipment sat waiting. The air felt thicker here, charged with strange energy, like the space itself was alive, vibrating in anticipation. She switched on the radio, the low static filling the room. But tonight was different. The hum wasn't just in the background. It was surrounding her, pushing in from every angle. Anna's hand shook as she adjusted the dials. She had to know what was on the other side of this signal. She had to understand the voice, the being that had reached out to her. Suddenly, the static broke, and a voice crackled through the air, clear as day. "Anna!" Her breath caught. It was the same voice from before, the voice that had called her name, the voice that had haunted her dreams. But now, it wasn't just speaking to her, it was pleading. "Anna, you don't know what you've done," the voice said, trembling with a strange urgency. "You've opened the gate. They are coming for you, coming for us all." Anna froze, her blood running cold. Her fingers trembled as she gripped the radio, feeling the power surge through it. The hum intensified, growing louder until it felt like the entire room was vibrating. "You have no idea what you've awakened," the voice continued. "The door is open, and the others are already coming through. They are here waiting." Before she could respond, the signal cut off. The room fell into an eerie silence. But Anna could feel it, the presence. The air was charged, thick with a weight that pressed down on her chest, suffocating her. She wasn't alone. For the darkness within. As the days passed, Anna's life began to unravel. The radio tower, the signal, the voices, they consumed her thoughts, creeping into every corner of her mind. The whispers, faint at first, grew louder each night until they filled her ears constantly, following her wherever she went. She started seeing things, shadows that moved in the corners of her vision, whispers that seemed to come from the walls. Her once peaceful town had transformed into a nightmare, and she was the one who had opened the door. Her friends and family had started to notice the change in her. She was losing weight, her eyes were sunken, and she never slept. But it wasn't just a physical toll. The mental toll was far worse. The shadows in her mind, the voices from beyond the veil, were tearing at her sanity. But there was one truth that had become undeniable. She had to close the door before it was too late. Episode 3, The Unseen Ones. Echoes in the dark. Anna's pulse raced as she sat alone in the darkness of her apartment, the only light coming from the dim glow of the old radio. The hum was faint at first, but it was there, always there. The signal, the whispering voices on the other side, had become an unshakable presence in her life. It no longer simply haunted her dreams. It consumed her waking moments, filling her thoughts, her mind, her soul. Every night, she found herself drawn back to the radio tower. There, in the presence of the hum, she hoped to find answers, or perhaps to end it all. The past few days had blurred together. Her friends and family had grown concerned, but no one could understand what she had stumbled upon, what she had unlocked by accident. They saw only a girl slowly unraveling, her mind lost in a sea of static and whispered messages. Anna had heard enough to know that this was no ordinary haunting. The voice, the one that first called her name, was no ghostly apparition. It was something else, something older, something otherworldly. The warnings from the signal had grown more dire. It spoke of doors that should never have been opened and creatures that were never meant to cross into the realm of the living. But why her? Why was she the one being targeted by these unseen ones? Anna couldn't ignore the fact that the voice was getting louder. It wasn't just a faint whisper anymore. It had become an urgent plea, as if the unseen force knew that its time was running out. It needed her help. It needed her to unlock the full potential of the signal. Despite her fear, Anna's curiosity burned brighter than ever. What did these voices want from her? Was she the key to something darker? The pull was undeniable. She reached for the radio again, her hands trembling slightly. The dial was still set to the frequency she had found on that fateful night. The signal was alive, buzzing like an electric current running through her veins. Anna knew she had to make a choice, to end it or to answer the call. With one deep breath, she turned the dial. The static hit her ears like a slap, but then, through the noise, came the voice. Anna! The voice echoed again, but this time, it wasn't just calling her. It was pleading. You've unlocked the door. They are here. You need to let us in, or they will break through. You must listen to me, Anna. You are the only one who can help. Anna's heart raced. Her breath caught in her throat. Who was this voice? What did it mean by they? And why her? You don't understand yet, but you will. There's no turning back. We have already entered your world, but we need your help to fully cross over. The gateway is open, and now we must walk through it. The room around Anna seemed to grow colder. The hum of the radio intensified, vibrating through the very walls of her apartment. It was as if the room itself was alive, breathing, moving. But just as suddenly as the voice had started, it was cut off. The room fell silent. 2. Unraveling the past. The next day, Anna found herself wandering the streets of Ravenswood, unable to shake the lingering dread that gripped her heart. The message had been clear. They are here, and she was the one who had opened the gate. But she still didn't know who they were. The only clue was a voice, and it had spoken of something deeper, something more terrifying than the radio signals. The curse of Ravenswood was older than she had imagined. This wasn't just about the abandoned radio tower. It was about a long-forgotten force, one that had been locked away for centuries. Anna decided to visit the local archive, hoping to find anything that might help. She was beginning to feel like a character trapped inside a story that she had stumbled into by accident but couldn't escape. The librarian, Mrs. Delaney, greeted her warily as she entered, her sharp eyes watching Anna closely. "You're back?" Mrs. Delaney said, her voice low. "I told you, some things are better left forgotten." But Anna wasn't about to be deterred. She pushed forward, determined to find answers. Mrs. Delaney led her to the oldest section of the archive, where the town's original records were kept. The air was thick with dust and the scent of old paper. The pages of ancient books crackled as Anna flipped through them, finding little more than cryptic entries and scattered notes. That was when she came across a diary, one that seemed out of place. It had no title, no author's name, but the leather binding was worn and the pages had been carefully preserved. As she flipped through the pages, her eyes widened at the words written in a dark, hurried hand. The signal will call them. The gate will open. When they come, they will bring the darkness that we have tried to keep sealed away. It will take more than us to stop them. It will take someone who is not of this world, someone who can hear their call. Anna's stomach churned. The words confirmed her worst fears. The signal was no accident. It was a deliberate act, one that had been set in motion long ago. But who had written this? And why had they left it hidden in this forgotten corner of Ravenswood? Her hands shook as she turned the next page. The diary's final entry read, "You must find the final key to close the gate. It is not here in Ravenswood, but beyond. You will find it in the darkness, where the light cannot reach. Beware the ones who come with the signal. They are not human, and they are not alone." 3. The unseen ones come. The more Anna uncovered, the more her fear grew. She had no choice now. She had to follow the clues, no matter how terrifying they seemed. The signal had been only the beginning. The real danger, she realized, was still to come. She had one lead left to follow, the darkness. But what did it mean? Could she even survive what lay ahead? As the sun began to set, Anna felt the air grow heavy again, like the very world was holding its breath. She returned to the radio tower, the source of it all. The signal was calling her back, pulling her closer to the truth, but she had no idea what she was about to face. As she stood before the tower, she realized something. The unseen ones were no longer hidden. They were here, watching her, waiting, and Anna would soon learn that opening the gateway had only been the first step. Episode 4, The Dark Awakening. A new discovery. The air had grown colder in Ravenswood. It was a subtle change, but one Anna couldn't ignore. Every night, the hum from the radio tower seemed to grow louder, more insistent. The voices, those whispered, cryptic messages, filled her head constantly, even in the dead of night. Sleep had become a foreign concept, and the only thing that kept her from slipping into madness was a hope that one more clue, one more answer, would set her free. But deep inside, Anna knew the truth. There was no escape. The signal had opened something dark, something ancient. It wasn't just a ghostly whisper anymore. It was a force that had been waiting. Tonight, Anna stood at the edge of the forest that bordered Ravenswood, her feet heavy with uncertainty. The wind howled through the trees, their branches creaking like skeletal fingers reaching for her. Her eyes were drawn to the radio tower in the distance, its twisted metal frame looming against the pale moonlight. She had spent countless hours researching the history of this place, scouring town records, but everything seemed to point back to Dr. Adrian Blackwell. His obsession with the paranormal, with trying to bridge the gap between the living and the dead, had led him to the tower, where he had begun his fateful experiments. But something went wrong, and now, the forgotten frequencies were calling her. Anna wasn't sure whether it was courage or sheer desperation that drove her forward. The last few days had been a blur of ghostly voices and visions, the lines between reality and the supernatural growing ever thinner. But she had to go. She had to confront the source of it all. 2. The doorway unlocked. The climb up the tower felt different tonight. The air was thick with tension, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Anna's heart raced. The rhythmic thump of her pulse louder in her ears than the creaking metal beneath her feet. Each step carried her closer to the unknown, to the answers she both craved and feared. She reached the top of the tower, and for a moment, she simply stood there, gazing out over the town below. Ravenswood was silent, too silent, as though the land itself was waiting for something to happen. With trembling hands, she reached for the radio's control panel. It was the same equipment she had used before, the same equipment that had opened the door. She had come here to understand it, to stop it, but the more she tried to make sense of it, the more it consumed her. As she turned the dials, the familiar hum filled the air, but this time it wasn't just static. The signal was different. It was clearer, more distinct. And then the voice came. "You're here." The voice echoed through the speakers, its tone dark, its resonance vibrating in her chest. "You've come to listen, haven't you?" Anna's breath hitched, her mind racing. It was the same voice, the one that had spoken to her from the start. But now, it felt more powerful, more commanding. "You have opened the gateway," the voice continued. "You've set us free, and now we are coming. The darkness will take you. It will consume you. There is no escape." Anna felt her stomach twist, a cold sweat breaking out on her skin. This wasn't just a warning anymore. It was a promise. But before she could respond, the transmission cut off, replaced by deafening static. The radio crackled violently. the noise growing so loud that Anna had to cover her ears. Then, as quickly as it had started, the static died. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. And in that silence, Anna could feel something shift in the air around her. Something was here. She wasn't alone. A movement in the shadows caught her eye. Her heart skipped a beat as she turned toward it. There, in the corner of the room, a figure stood in the darkness, its form barely visible, but its presence overwhelming. 3. The unseen forces. Anna's breath caught in her throat as she stepped back, heart pounding. The figure didn't move, but Anna could feel its eyes, or something like eyes, watching her. It wasn't human. No, it was something far worse. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to stretch. She could hear whispers, faint but growing louder. The voice, it was speaking again, but this time it wasn't just one voice. It was a chorus, 1,000 voices, all speaking in unison. "You have unlocked the door." The voices echoed, their tone ancient, filled with an unbearable weight. "The bridge is open. The floodgates are coming." The shadows in the room began to shift, swirling together, twisting into shapes that defied reality. Anna's heart raced as she took a step back, but the figure moved forward, its form becoming clearer. It was tall, thin, and distorted, its features hidden in the darkness, but its presence was undeniable. Anna felt it press against her, suffocating her with its coldness. And then it spoke again, this time with a voice that made her blood run cold. "You are the key," the figure hissed, its voice a distorted blend of agony and malice. "You opened the door. You called us here, and now there is no turning back." Anna stumbled backward, her mind struggling to comprehend what was happening. She had to escape. She had to stop it, but how? The radio, the signal, it had brought them here. She was trapped, but just as she turned to flee, the figure's hand shot out, its long fingers curling around her wrist with inhuman strength. Anna gasped, but the figure only tightened its grip, pulling her closer, its face now clear in the dim light. The figure's face was a horror beyond anything Anna had ever imagined. Its skin was pale, mottled with black veins, and its eyes were empty, like deep, endless voids, sucking the very light around them. "You will never leave," it whispered, its breath cold against her skin. "You will join us and the others who came before you. You will be part of the darkness." 4. The point of no return. Just when Anna thought she couldn't take any more, a blinding light exploded around her, filling the room. The figure shrieked, its grip loosening as the light pushed it back, retreating into shadows. In that moment, Anna managed to pull free, her body trembling, her heart hammering in her chest. She ran from the tower, her legs moving on their own as she stumbled through the darkened woods. She didn't look back. She couldn't. The whispers were still following her, growing louder with every step. But something had changed. The gateway had been opened, and now there was no escaping what had been unleashed. The darkness had already crossed over. Anna had made a choice she might never be able to take back. She had released something far worse than she could have ever imagined. As the night closed in around her, she realized the truth. The horror was just beginning. Episode 5. The Dreadful Signal. "I!" whispers in the walls. Anna's footsteps echoed through the empty streets of Ravenswood as she made her way toward the edge of town. Her thoughts raced, still trying to process the terrifying events that had unfolded over the past few days. The radio tower was no longer just a symbol of forgotten history. It was a beacon, drawing her and those around her into something far darker than she could have ever imagined. The voices, the whispers, had grown more persistent since her encounter with the figure at the tower. They weren't just a product of her imagination anymore. No, the whispers were coming from everywhere, in the walls of her apartment, in the rustle of the leaves outside, in the quiet hum of the night. They were always there, lurking, waiting. Anna could feel the tension in the air as she walked. It was as if something invisible was pressing in on her, suffocating her with every breath. Her chest tightened, and despite the cool breeze, she felt a deep, unrelenting heat building in her body. The truth was clear now. The tower, the signal, the voices, they weren't just echoes of the past. They were alive, and they had been waiting for someone to unlock the gate. She had made that choice, and now there was no turning back. But it wasn't just the whispers that haunted her. No, the most horrifying part of it all was the presence. It was there every time she turned a corner, every time she tried to sleep. Something was following her, watching her, waiting for the moment when the door would open fully. The only question now was, what would happen when it did? 2. The return of the signal. Anna had tried to avoid the radio tower, but it was as if the signal had a life of its own. No matter how much she tried to ignore it, no matter how far she ran, the pull of the frequency seemed to call her back. That night, Anna stood before the tower once more, her heart pounding in her chest. The wind had picked up, rustling the trees, but the air around the tower was unnaturally still. It felt like the entire world was holding its breath, waiting for something. She approached the rusted control panel. The metal cooled beneath her fingertips. The equipment had been old even when it was first installed. But now, after years of neglect, it looked even more dilapidated. Yet, the hum, the unmistakable hum, was there, vibrating to the metal, through the very air around her. Anna hesitated for a moment, her pulse quickening. Was she ready for this? Did she truly understand what she was about to do? The whispers filled her ears again, louder this time, and she knew the answer. She didn't have a choice. She reached for the dial and, with a trembling hand, turned it. The static burst into life, filling the room with a deafening roar. But there, beneath the noise, a voice emerged, clearer than before, stronger. Anna, the voice was unmistakable, and yet it was different, more commanding, more powerful. It seemed to reverberate deep within her chest, making her feel as if it were coming from the very core of the earth itself. "You've unlocked the door, Anna," the voice said, its tone sending a shiver down her spine. "Now you must step through. The others are coming." The gate is open. Anna's heart raced, and the hairs on her neck stood on end. The dread was overwhelming now, suffocating her. She had known that this moment was inevitable, but hearing the words spoken aloud, hearing the truth, made it all too real. Before she could respond, the transmission cut off, replaced by an overwhelming wave of static. The tower trembled as if it were alive, its very foundation shaking beneath her feet. She had opened the gate, and now there was no turning back. 3. The awakening. Anna rushed out of the tower, her breath ragged as she stumbled down the path. The air around her felt thick, pressing against her, suffocating her. She couldn't stop herself from looking over her shoulder, half expecting to see the dark figure from before, the one who had claimed her soul. But there was nothing, just the empty streets of Ravenswood, bathed in the eerie glow of the moon. Still, Anna knew the truth. They were coming. The others, the entities from beyond the veil. She had called them into this world with her curiosity, and now they were preparing to make their presence known. Anna found herself at the old library once again. She had to understand more. She had to find a way to stop this before it was too late. Inside, the library was quiet, as always. The air smelled of old books, a mixture of dust and history. She approached the reference desk, where Mrs. Delaney had helped her before. The librarian was nowhere to be seen, but Anna could feel the weight of the silence pressing in on her. It was as if the library itself was holding its breath. Suddenly, Anna froze. A whisper passed through the room, soft and insistent, like a distant murmur in the back of her mind. She turned around, her eyes scanning the empty space. And that's when she saw it. A book, tucked away on the highest shelf, glowing faintly in the dim light. It wasn't just any book. This was the key. She climbed the ladder to reach the book, her hands trembling as she pulled it from the shelf. The cover was old, the leather cracked with age, but the title was still visible, though faded. The Threshold. Opening the book, Anna found pages filled with cryptic symbols, charts, and diagrams. The more she read, the more she understood. This wasn't just a story. It was a manual, a guide to understanding the portal, the gate, the very force that had been unleashed. But there was a warning that chilled her to the core. When the gate is open, the world will change. There is no turning back. To close the gate, one must sacrifice that which they hold most dear. 4. The price of opening the door. The weight of the words pressed on Anna's chest as she closed the book. Sacrifice. The word echoed in her mind over and over again. She had opened the gate. She had called the others into this world. But at what cost? Was to sacrifice her life? Her soul? Or was there something worse she would have to give up to undo the damage she had done? The radio tower was calling her back. The voices were louder now, more insistent. The darkness was drawing closer. Anna knew what she had to do. The sacrifice was inevitable, but she wasn't sure if she had the strength to follow through. She could feel the presence of the unseen ones growing stronger, closing in on her every step. But in the back of her mind, she knew one thing for sure. The only way to stop it was to face it, to enter the darkness, to make the ultimate sacrifice. And so, with a heavy heart, Anna began her journey to the tower once more. She wasn't sure if she would survive the night, but she was determined to find a way to stop the horror she had unleashed. As she walked toward the tower, the hum of the signal grew louder, and the shadows began to stretch, closing around her. She was no longer just a bystander in this dark tale. She was the key, the only one who could stop it or ensure that the others would come. The sacrifice would be made. There was no turning back now. Episode 5. The Dreadful Signal. "Aye!" whispers in the walls. Anna's footsteps echoed through the empty streets of Ravenswood as she made her way toward the edge of town. Her thoughts raced, still trying to process the terrifying events that had unfolded over the past few days. The radio tower was no longer just a symbol of forgotten history. It was a beacon, drawing her and those around her into something far darker than she could have ever imagined. The voices, the whispers, had grown more persistent since her encounter with the figure at the tower. They weren't just a product of her imagination anymore. No, the whispers were coming from everywhere, in the walls of her apartment, in the rustle of the leaves outside, in the quiet hum of the night. They were always there, lurking, waiting. Anna could feel the tension in the air as she walked. It was as if something invisible was pressing in on her, suffocating her with every breath. Her chest tightened, and despite the cool breeze, she felt a deep, unrelenting heat building in her body. The truth was clear now. The tower, the signal, the voices, they weren't just echoes of the past. They were alive, and they had been waiting for someone to unlock the gate. She had made that choice, and now there was no turning back. But it wasn't just the whispers that haunted her. No, the most horrifying part of it all was the presence. It was there every time she turned a corner, every time she tried to sleep. Something was following her, watching her, waiting for the moment when the door would open fully. The only question now was, what would happen when it did? 2. The return of the signal. Anna had tried to avoid the radio tower, but it was as if the signal had a life of its own. No matter how much she tried to ignore it, no matter how far she ran, the pull of the frequency seemed to call her back. That night, Anna stood before the tower once more, her heart pounding in her chest. The wind had picked up, rustling the trees, but the air around the tower was unnaturally still. It felt like the entire world was holding its breath, waiting for something. She approached the rusted control panel. The metal cooled beneath her fingertips. The equipment had been old even when it was first installed. But now, after years of neglect, it looked even more dilapidated. Yet, the hum, the unmistakable hum, was there, vibrating to the metal, through the very air around her. Anna hesitated for a moment, her pulse quickening. Was she ready for this? Did she truly understand what she was about to do? The whispers filled her ears again, louder this time, and she knew the answer. She didn't have a choice. She reached for the dial and, with a trembling hand, turned it. The static burst into life, filling the room with a deafening roar. But there, beneath the noise, a voice emerged, clearer than before, stronger. Anna, the voice was unmistakable, and yet it was different, more commanding, more powerful. It seemed to reverberate deep within her chest, making her feel as if it were coming from the very core of the earth itself. "You've unlocked the door, Anna," the voice said, its tone sending a shiver down her spine. "Now you must step through. The others are coming. The gate is open." Anna's heart raced, and the hairs on her neck stood on end. The dread was overwhelming now, suffocating her. She had known that this moment was inevitable, but hearing the words spoken aloud, hearing the truth, made it all too real. Before she could respond, the transmission cut off, replaced by an overwhelming wave of static. The tower trembled as if it were alive, its very foundation shaking beneath her feet. She had opened the gate, and now there was no turning back. 3. The Awakening. Anna rushed out of the tower, her breath ragged as she stumbled down the path. The air around her felt thick, pressing against her, suffocating her. She couldn't stop herself from looking over her shoulder, half expecting to see the dark figure from before, the one who had claimed her soul. But there was nothing, just the empty streets of Ravenswood, bathed in the eerie glow of the moon. Still, Anna knew the truth. They were coming. The others, the entities from beyond the veil. She had called them into this world with her curiosity, and now they were preparing to make their presence known. Anna found herself at the old library once again. She had to understand more. She had to find a way to stop this before it was too late. Inside, the library was quiet, as always. The air smelled of old books, a mixture of dust and history. She approached the reference desk, where Mrs. Delaney had helped her before. The librarian was nowhere to be seen, but Anna could feel the weight of the silence pressing in on her. It was as if the library itself was holding its breath. Suddenly, Anna froze. A whisper passed through the room, soft and insistent, like a distant murmur in the back of her mind. She turned around, her eyes scanning the empty space. And that's when she saw it. A book, tucked away on the highest shelf, glowing faintly in the dim light. It wasn't just any book. This was the key. She climbed the ladder to reach the book, her hands trembling as she pulled it from the shelf. The cover was old, the leather cracked with age, but the title was still visible, though faded. The Threshold. Opening the book, Anna found pages filled with cryptic symbols, charts, and diagrams. The more she read, the more she understood. This wasn't just a story. It was a manual, a guide to understanding the portal, the gate, the very force that had been unleashed. But there was a warning that chilled her to the core. When the gate is open, the world will change. There is no turning back. To close the gate, one must sacrifice that which they hold most dear. 4. The price of opening the door. The weight of the words pressed on Anna's chest as she closed the book. Sacrifice. The word echoed in her mind over and over again. She had opened the gate. She had called the others into this world. But at what cost? Was the sacrifice her life? Her soul? Or was there something worse she would have to give up to undo the damage she had done? The radio tower was calling her back. The voices were louder now, more insistent. The darkness was drawing closer. Anna knew what she had to do. The sacrifice was inevitable, but she wasn't sure if she had the strength to follow through. She could feel the presence of the unseen ones growing stronger, closing in on her every step. But in the back of her mind, she knew one thing for sure. The only way to stop it was to face it, to enter the darkness, to make the ultimate sacrifice. And so, with a heavy heart, Anna began her journey to the tower once more. She wasn't sure if she would survive the night, but she was determined to find a way to stop the horror she had unleashed. As she walked toward the tower, the hum of the signal grew louder, and the shadows began to stretch, closing around her. She was no longer just a bystander in this dark tale. She was the key, the only one who could stop it or ensure that the others would come. The sacrifice would be made. There was no turning back now. Episode 7, The Depths of Silence. The Aftermath. Anna's mind was racing as she stared at the darkened window of her apartment. It had been days since her encounter with Dr. Adrian Blackwell, and still, she couldn't shake the sense of dread that hung over her like a storm cloud. She had never believed in the paranormal, never considered that the world could hold such horrors. But now, there was no denying it. The otherworldly had crossed over, and she had played a role in unlocking the gate. Her thoughts drifted back to that night, to the radio tower and the mysterious signal that had led her down this cursed path. The whispers that had started innocently enough had grown into a cacophony of haunting voices. The unseen ones, the dark figures, had only grown stronger, more real, and more dangerous. She knew she couldn't stay hidden in her apartment forever. Try to block out the constant hum that had invaded her life. The presence of the shadows was always there, watching her every move, waiting for her to make the next choice. It was as if the darkness was closing in, pushing her closer to something she couldn't comprehend, couldn't escape. But she had to face it. She had no choice. 2. The Call of the Void. The night was silent as Anna stood before the door of the old library. The town of Ravenswood had always been quiet, but tonight it felt eerily still. The wind had stopped howling, and the streets were empty, as though the entire town had retreated into the shadows, waiting for something terrible to happen. Anna hesitated for a moment before pushing open a heavy door, the hinges creaking loudly in the silence. She stepped inside, her footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust that had settled over everything. The smell of old paper and aged leather filled her lungs, and for a brief moment, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. But she knew that calm was fleeting. The library had always been a place of safety for Anna. It was where she had found the book that had given her the first real clue about the signal and the dark forces behind it. But now, as she made her way through the narrow aisles, the familiar rows of books seemed like silent witnesses, watching her every move. Anna reached the back of the library, where the restricted section was kept. There, hidden among the dusty tomes, was the book she needed, the one that would reveal the truth about the signal and what had happened to Blackwell. As she pulled the book from the shelf, she could feel the weight of its pages pulling her down, dragging her deeper into the mystery. The ancient symbol on the cover, an intricate, swirling design, seemed to move beneath her fingertips. It was as if the book itself were alive, waiting for her to unlock its secrets. Anna flipped through the pages, each one revealing more disturbing information. The signal, she learned, wasn't just a tool for communication. It was a bridge, a portal that allowed the unseen ones to cross from their realm into the human world. The book spoke of sacrifices, pacts, and ancient rites performed by those who sought to control the flow of energy between worlds. And then, she found a passage that made her blood run cold. The signal is a call to the other side. It beckons those who've been lost, those who dwell in the void. But the signal is not simply a bridge. It is a trap, a lure to bring the lost ones home. And once they return, they will not leave. The darkness will consume them and all who hear its call. The words were like a curse, and Anna felt a chill run through her as she read them. She was the one who had opened the door, the one who had brought them here. The otherworldly entities that had begun to infiltrate Ravenswood were no longer just shadows. They were real, and they were closing in on her. 3. The face of the unknown. As Anna closed the book, she felt a presence behind her. A cold, suffocating feeling crept up her spine. She turned slowly, her heart pounding, and found herself face to face with a figure, tall, shadowed, and standing just beyond the shelf. The figure stepped forward, and Anna's breath hitched. It was him, Dr. Blackwell. But his appearance was far from the man she had seen before. His face was pale, almost ghostly, with dark circles under his eyes. His clothing was tattered, as though he had been trapped in a dark, oppressive space for a long time. But his eyes, those eyes, were empty black voids, hollow and infinite. "You open the door, Anna," he said, his voice deep and hollow. "Now they are here. They have crossed over." Anna's mind raced. She had expected something, anything. But this, Blackwell, the man who had once been a scientist, a man with ambition, now stood before her as something else, something far worse than human. "The gate was never meant to be opened," Blackwell continued, his voice filled with sorrow. "But you have done it, and now you must understand there is no way to close it. Not anymore. The darkness is coming for us all." His words rang in Anna's ears as she backed away, her heart pounding in her chest. She had made a mistake. "What do you mean?" she whispered, fear creeping into her voice. "The portal has already begun to collapse," Blackwell said, his form flickering in and out of focus, like a mirage. "And when it does, there will be no escape. The void will consume everything." Anna's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a warning. It was a reality. The radio signal, the shadows, the strange occurrences in Ravenswood. It was all part of a plan to bring something terrible into this world. Something far more ancient and powerful than anything she could have imagined. But there was one question left unanswered. What was the price of stopping it? 4. A dangerous choice. Anna's thoughts spiraled out of control as she tried to make sense of the situation. The presence of the unseen ones was growing stronger. She could feel them, even when they weren't physically present. It was as though they were waiting for her to make a choice that would determine the fate of not only Ravenswood, but the world itself. The radio tower called her name again. The hum had returned, louder than ever, reverberating in her mind, urging her to come. But this time, Anna knew what she had to do. She couldn't let the darkness fully invade this world. She couldn't let them win. But was it already too late? Was there any way to close the door she had opened? She had to act quickly. She had to find the answers, or else she and everyone she loved would be lost to the void forever. Anna closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, and turned toward the door. She didn't have all the answers yet, but she would find them. The only question was whether she could do it before it was too late. Episode 8. Echoes of the Deep. The Unraveling. The air felt colder than usual. The wind whipped through the streets of Ravenswood, but it wasn't the wind that made Anna shiver. It was a feeling that something was wrong. Something was coming, something ancient and far more powerful than she could comprehend. She could feel the pulse of the radio tower deep in her chest, the hum vibrating to the ground beneath her feet. The gateway is closing, the voice had told her earlier, but not in the way you think. Anna didn't know what that meant. She didn't know if she could even trust the voice anymore. It had become more cryptic with each passing day, speaking in riddles, offering pieces of information that led her deeper into the darkness, but never offering a clear path to escape. The more she tried to solve it, the more she realized there was no escape. She had opened the gate, and now there was no way to close it. The forces she had unleashed were too strong. She had hoped, foolishly, that the signal from the radio tower might offer a clue, a way to undo the damage she had done. But every time she tried, the voices grew louder and the figures in the shadows grew closer. It was only a matter of time before they crossed over completely. Anna had been running for days, but running had never been an option. It was only delaying the inevitable. And now, as she stood at the edge of the forest, staring at the radio tower that loomed ahead, she knew what she had to do. She had to confront it. 2. The return of Dr. Blackwell. The trees loomed around her, twisted and gnarled, their branches stretching like skeletal arms. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. Anna's heart pounded in her chest as she moved toward the base of the tower, the thrum of the signal growing louder with every step. Her eyes flicked around, but there was no one in sight. No one except the shadows that seemed to be shifting and moving in the corners of her vision. The air felt thicker now, heavier, as though the weight of the world itself had descended on Ravenswood. She stepped forward, the metal of the radio tower cold against her fingertips as she placed her hand on it. She could feel it, the pulse, stronger now, as if it were drawing her in, urging her to continue, to go deeper. And then the figure appeared. It wasn't a man she expected, though it had a human shape, but the figure was distorted, the air around it rippling like a mirage. The man or thing stood there with a presence that was suffocating. Anna's heart dropped when she saw him clearly. It was Dr. Adrian Blackwell, but not the same as she remembered. His face was pale, almost sickly, his eyes sunken in black. His once tidy suit was now torn and covered in grime, as though he had been living in the shadows, away from the light, for far too long. Anna, his voice rasped, hoarse and distant. You have come to face the truth. Anna took a step back, her body trembling with the cold, but it wasn't the temperature that made her shiver. It was the presence of Blackwell. Something was wrong. The shadows around him seemed to move on their own, swirling like tendrils reaching for her. It was as if his very being was tethered to something else, something that wasn't this world. You opened the door, Blackwell continued, his voice full of regret. And now the others are here. They've crossed over, Anna. It's too late to stop it. Anna's breath caught. She didn't want to hear this. She didn't want to believe it. But deep down, she knew he was right. The darkness was spreading, and there was no stopping it now. Not anymore. The signal, Anna whispered, the words slipping from her mouth before she could stop them. It's getting worse. The voices, they're growing louder. What do they want? Blackwell's eyes flickered, a sadness passing over his features. They want everything, Anna. They want to consume this world. They want to take it back. And now you are the key. You open the gate, and now the portal is wide enough for them to enter. There's nothing left for us but the inevitable. Anna's mind raced. What did he mean by the inevitable? What had she set in motion? You have a choice, Blackwell said, his voice low and dark. But that choice will come at a price. 3. The dreadful decision. Anna's pulse quickened as Blackwell's words rang in her ears. She had always believed in science, in logic, in explanations that could make sense of the world around her. But this wasn't science. It wasn't anything she had ever learned or understood. This was something far older, something beyond comprehension. What price? Anna asked, though she wasn't sure if she really wanted to know. Blackwell's gaze darkened. A sacrifice, he whispered. The signal must be severed, but only through the loss of what you hold most dear. Anna's mind spun. The radio tower, the signal, the voices, they were all connected. But the cost? What could she possibly sacrifice to stop this? Before she could respond, a loud crash echoed from the tower, followed by a sudden, blinding flash of light. The ground beneath her feet shook violently, and the air filled with the familiar hum of the signal, now louder than ever. Anna tried to run, but the force of the tremor knocked her off balance. She scrambled to her feet, desperate to get away, but the air felt thick, as if she were being pulled toward something. Then the voices came. They weren't whispers anymore. They were screams, thundering in her mind. "It's too late," they cried. "You cannot escape. You are ours." Anna turned to see Blackwell, his body flickering, as though it were part of the very shadow that clung to the land. "The sacrifice, Anna," he urged, his voice filled with desperation. "It's your only chance. You can stop them, but you must give everything you have." 4. The price of darkness. The air seemed to suffocate her, as Anna realized what Blackwell meant. The darkness, the signal, the voices, they had all led to this moment. She had to make a choice. She had to decide who or what she was willing to lose to save the world. But the true horror of the decision was this. She didn't know if she would survive what was coming next. Episode 9, The Shadow's Embrace. The price of silence. Anna's eyes snapped open, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The familiar hum of the radio tower was louder than ever, reverberating through her bones as she lay there, her pulse racing. She had seen the shadow, the one that followed her, that haunted her every move. It wasn't just a figure. It was alive, its presence suffocating and oppressive. It moved like smoke, flickering in and out of existence, always just out of reach. The whispers came again, growing louder, urging her to make the choice. "It's too late, Anna. You cannot outrun us." The voice was familiar now, cold and filled with malice. It was a voice that had echoed in her dreams, that had driven her to the edge of madness. It was a voice of the unseen ones, the beings that had crossed over from the dark side of the veil. Anna stood up, her legs unsteady beneath her. The room was cold, the windows rattling their frames as the wind outside howled like a wild animal. She glanced at the clock, but it didn't matter. Time had lost its meaning ever since she had opened the gate. Her thoughts returned to Dr. Adrian Blackwell and his cryptic words. The sacrifice. She had never truly understood what it meant. Not until now. He had told her that to stop the darkness, she would have to give up what she held most dear. But how could she choose? Who could she lose? The weight of it pressed down on her chest, suffocating her with its finality. Anna glanced toward the window, her eyes catching sight of the radio tower in the distance, its silhouette sharp against the stormy sky. It beckoned to her like a silent predator, waiting for her to make her move. She had no choice. She had to go back. 2. The Tower of Shadows. The journey back to the radio tower felt like an eternity. Each step was heavy, as if the earth itself was pulling her down, dragging her into the depths. The wind picked up, biting through her clothes, but Anna barely noticed. All she could hear was a hum, the constant buzzing in the back of her mind. It was like a heartbeat, the pulse of something much larger than herself. As she reached the base of the tower, she could feel the presence waiting for her. The shadows had grown thicker, more tangible. They stretched across the ground, creeping up the walls, blocking out the light. The portal was open. She could feel it. The very air was charged, crackling with unnatural energy. The signal had become stronger, more insistent, almost as if it were alive, like a creature in its own right, feeding on her fear. She stepped closer to the base of the tower, feeling the vibrations beneath her feet. Her hand brushed against the cold metal, and she could hear the whispers again, this time clearer than ever. "It's time, Anna," they said. "You've come to finish what you started." The figure emerged from the shadows then, moving as if it were one with the night itself. It was Blackwell, or what was left of him. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow, darkened by the endless abyss from which he had come. "I try to warn you," he said, his voice barely a whisper, as if the wind might carry it away. "You don't understand, Anna. Once the door is open, there's no going back. The darkness would devour everything." Anna shook her head, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't let this happen. She couldn't let the darkness consume her or the world. "I can stop it," she said, though she wasn't sure she truly believed her own words. She reached for the dials on the radio equipment, but her fingers trembled, unsure of what would happen next. The air around her grew heavier, thicker with the presence of the shadows. Blackwell's form flickered, his expression twisting into something unrecognizable. "No, Anna, you don't get it." His voice grew louder, more frantic. "You are the one who opened the door. You are the one who let them in. And now you must pay the price." The temperature dropped, and Anna felt a cold hand close around her heart. The shadows tightened, their tendrils reaching for her. Her vision blurred as they pulled at her, dragging her into the void. She fought against them, her breath coming in short gasps. But the more she struggled, the more the shadows seemed to multiply, filling the air with cold, suffocating darkness. She could hear the whispers again, louder now, echoing in her ears. "You've opened the gate. You brought them here." Her breath caught in her throat as she realized what she had done. The radio tower wasn't just a signal. It was a trap. She had been lured in like a moth to a flame. The signal was the gateway to the other side, and now that it was open, there was no going back. 3. The decision. Blackwell's face was now mere inches from hers, his hollow eyes staring deep into her soul. "You can still close the gate, but you have to make a sacrifice," he said, his voice colder than ever. "But be warned, Anna. The price is more than you think. You will have to choose what matters most to you." The air was thick with tension. Anna's chest constricted, her heart pounding in her ears. She had no time. The whispers were growing louder, the shadows reaching closer, threatening to engulf her. She had to make the choice. But could she? What was she willing to lose? Blackwell's voice grew more urgent. "Do it now, or they will claim you." Anna's eyes scanned the darkened tower, her mind racing. She could feel the pulse of the radio signal now, pulling at her, urging her to finish what she had started. The others were coming. With a final, shuddering breath, Anna made her decision. She reached for the switch. Episode 10. Echoes of the Abyss. The Abyss calls. The world was quieter now. Too quiet. Ravenswood, once bustling with the sound of life, now felt like a ghost town. The streets were empty, the houses dark. Even the wind, which had once whispered secrets through trees, had fallen silent. Only the distant hum of the radio tower filled the void, a constant reminder of the otherworldly presence that lingered just beyond the veil. Anna stood at the edge of the town, staring at the towering structure in the distance. It loomed over the landscape like a dark sentinel, a silent witness to the horrors that had been unleashed. The gate was still open, and the shadows were growing stronger, their presence suffocating. She had made her choice, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something far worse was yet to come. The radio had stopped speaking to her, the whispers fading into a terrible silence. But Anna knew that the absence of sound was just as dangerous as the noise. There was something waiting, something far worse than the shadowy figures or the voices. And it was coming. Her pulse quickened as she felt the pull, the force drawing her toward the tower. She could no longer fight it. The signal had become part of her, and now It was all-consuming. "You can't stop it, Anna," a voice whispered in her mind. "The others are already here. The gate is open and the abyss is waiting." Anna tried to shake off the voice, but it echoed louder in her mind. She had thought that if she confronted the signal, if she faced the truth, she could close the gateway, end the nightmare. But nothing was as simple as she had hoped. The more she fought, the more the darkness grew, feeding on her fear, on her confusion. There is no going back. The words were clear now, not just in her mind, but from the radio tower itself. The signal pulsed, sending a wave of energy through the air. Anna's body trembled, her legs buckling beneath her as the power of the radio coursed through her, pulling her toward the tower. She could feel the presence behind her now, the cold, creeping fingers of the unseen ones closing in. They had crossed over completely, and now it was up to her to decide if she would sacrifice herself to stop them, or if she would join them in the abyss. 2. The echo of the void. Anna's feet finally moved, as if controlled by something other than her own will. The pull of the signal was stronger than any force she had ever felt. She couldn't stop herself, couldn't break free. Her mind raced with panic, her heart pounding in her chest as she drew closer to the tower. She could hear footsteps behind her now. Soft at first, almost imperceptible, but then louder, growing closer, as if someone was walking in perfect synchronization with her own steps. She glanced over her shoulder, but there was nothing there, but the footsteps continued. She quickened her pace, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She couldn't be alone. She knew she wasn't. The shadows were closing in, moving with a speed and fluidity that was unnatural, like liquid darkness. Then, just as Anna reached the base of the tower, the air shifted. The oppressive weight of the presence behind her intensified, and she spun around to face the unknown figure. But this time, it wasn't Blackwell. It was something worse. A tall figure, cloaked in a robe of shifting shadows, stood before her. Its face was hidden beneath a dark hood, its features obscured by the blackness that seemed to writhe around it. The figure stepped forward, its presence overpowering, as if the very air around it bent and twisted under its weight. Anna's heart raced, the fear coursing through her like a tide, but she refused to back down. She had to face this. Whatever it was, she had no choice. The figure's voice echoed in her mind. "You have opened the door, Anna, and now you will pay the price." Her knees wobbled, but she held her ground. "I mean to. I never wanted this." The figure tilted its head slightly, its presence growing even more intense. "It does not matter what you want. The gate has been opened, and now the abyss is here." It extended a hand toward her, and Anna could feel the cold of its touch even from where she stood. Her breath caught in her throat as she felt a pull, a connection, something deeper than just a radio signal. This was something ancient, something tied to the very fabric of reality. The shadows behind the figure writhed like snakes, reaching for her with an unsettling hunger. The void had come, and with it, everything Anna had feared. 3. The cost of power. Anna took a step back, her legs shaking beneath her. The figure stepped forward again, and this time, she could feel its presence pressing against her, suffocating her in the dark energy that poured off it. The figure's voice whispered in her mind once more. "You have opened the doorway, Anna. You are the one who summoned us, and now you must join us." Anna's eyes widened in terror as the reality of her situation settled in. She had been foolish. The signal, the radio tower, everything had led her to this moment. She had unleashed the darkness. She had opened a door that could never be closed again. "No," she whispered, her voice shaking. I can't be one of you." The figure seemed to chuckle, a low, hollow sound that echoed through her mind like a drumbeat. "You already are, Anna. You always have been." The ground beneath her feet trembled, and the radio tower groaned as if it were alive, its metal bones creaking in protest. The hum of the signal grew louder, almost deafening. It was a sound that filled her chest, her mind, her soul. Anna closed her eyes, trying to block out the noise, the sensation, the presence of the figure before her. But the moment she did, the radio tower exploded with light, blinding her. 4. The final choice. The world around her shifted, like a dream unraveling. And suddenly, she was no longer standing at the base of the tower. She was somewhere else. A dark, endless space filled with shadows, with whispers, with cold. "Where am I?" Anna asked, her voice barely a whisper in the void. The figure stood before her again, its form now more solid, its features clearer. The hooded figure was no longer a blur. Its face was exposed, a face that seemed to shift, changing with each passing moment, never settling into something familiar. "This is where all things end," the figure replied, its voice cold and distant. "This is the abyss. This is where you will remain." Anna's heart raced. She had come so far, fought so hard, only to find herself trapped in this place, in this emptiness. "No," Anna whispered. "I can't stay here. I won't." The figure's face shifted again, its expression unreadable. "Then you must make a choice. You have opened the door. You have drawn us here. But now the price must be paid." Episode 11. Whispers in the Void. A shift in the silence. The air was thick with anticipation, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Ravenswood had been silent for far too long. The hum of the radio tower now a constant, maddening presence in Anna's mind. It wasn't just a hum of electricity. It was the pulse of the otherworldly entities that had crossed over from their dark, unseen realm. The silence that had settled over the town felt suffocating, like the calm before a storm. But Anna knew better now. There was no safety in silence, no reprieve from the relentless shadow that clung to everything. Anna stood at the window of her apartment, staring into the endless night. The wind had picked up again, howling through the streets with a low, mournful cry. But it wasn't the wind that had her on edge. It was a presence outside, the invisible force that had been following her ever since the gate had been opened. The echoes of the past and the future, the voices from the other side, had begun to creep into her thoughts, their whispers growing louder and more urgent with each passing hour. Her reflection in the glass stared back at her, but something was wrong. She could feel it. The darkness that had once felt distant was now closer, as if it were waiting just beyond her reach. Every night, the figures in the shadows seemed to grow stronger, more defined, as if they were waiting for the right moment to take hold of her completely. She couldn't shake the feeling that the tower was calling her again. It always called her, beckoning her to step into the unknown, to face the truth. But every time she approached, it felt like stepping into a trap, one that was carefully set, waiting for her to fall. She had already sacrificed so much to understand what was happening, but the cost was rising with every step. The voices, the whispers, they were all around her now, too, the unseen ones. It had been a week since the last confrontation with Blackwell, and Anna had barely been able to sleep since. The encounter with the shapeless figure in the radio tower had left her with more questions than answers. The world she once understood was now a distant memory, replaced by a strange and terrifying reality that she couldn't escape. She had tried to piece together what she had learned from Blackwell, but the information was too fragmented, too cryptic. The signal was a door, he had said. The gateway was open, and there was no way to close it. But she couldn't accept that. There had to be a way to stop the others from crossing over. There had to be a way to undo the damage. The books in the library had become her only refuge, and yet every new piece of information felt like a dark puzzle, each piece revealing more horrors. She found herself drawn back to forbidden texts, those that had once terrified her. She needed answers, even if it meant risking her own sanity. The signals from the tower had once been chaotic, filled with static, but now they were clear, almost too clear. The whispers had become distinct voices, speaking in languages she didn't understand, urging her to listen, to follow the sound. "It's coming for you," one voice had whispered the night before, its tone soft but filled with undeniable authority. "You cannot hide. You cannot run." The message was simple, yet chilling. The unseen ones were growing stronger, and they were aware of her every move. She had opened the door, and now they would not let her forget that. 3. The gathering darkness. Anna made her way to the base of the tower, her steps slow and deliberate. The town was eerily quiet, the streets empty. The buildings around her seemed to lean in, as if the town itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. The sky was dark, filled with rolling clouds that threatened rain, but there was no storm. There was only the feeling that something was watching. As she approached the tower, she saw the flickering light at the top, its eerie glow casting long shadows over the ground. It was as though the tower itself were a beacon, drawing her in, pulling her toward it. The hum was louder now, the sound vibrating in her chest like a heartbeat, and Anna could feel it in her bones. The tower wasn't just a machine anymore. It was alive, pulsing with energy from another world, a world that had been waiting for her to open the door. The door to the tower stood before her, unlocked, waiting for her to enter. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the cold metal handle. The air around her thickened, and the whispers grew louder, almost deafening. "Come closer," the voices beckoned. "You have no choice." She knew it was a trap. She knew it. But the need to know the truth was stronger than her fear. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the door. The doorway to despair. Inside, the tower was even darker than she had imagined. The walls were lined with old equipment, wires and machines tangled in a chaotic mess. The radio equipment hummed louder now, the static filling the air, scratching at her brain. The voices were everywhere, in the static in the walls, in the very air she breathed. Her eyes scanned the room, but there was no sign of Blackwell. No sign of anyone. Just the equipment, the hum, and the shadows. Then, the light flickered, and for a moment, everything went dark. Anna froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't have to see the shadows to know they were there. She could feel them. The presence that had followed her for so long was finally closing in. The lights flickered again, and when they came back on, she was no longer alone. Standing before her was a figure she had feared most, a shapeless, shifting mass, a creature of shadow and smoke, its form constantly changing, never settling into anything solid. But she could see its eyes, two glowing orbs of darkness, watching her with a terrifying intensity. V, the final decision. The creature stepped forward, its presence growing heavier, suffocating the air around her. Anna backed away, but there was nowhere to run. The door was behind her, but it was no use. She had already crossed the threshold. The shadow was closing in, its dark tendrils reaching for her. "You cannot escape," the voice whispered, this time coming from everywhere at once. "You have opened the gate. Now you will join us." Anna took a deep breath, summoning the last of her courage. "I won't give in to you," she said, her voice trembling but defiant. The creature's laughter filled the room, hollow and mocking. "You have no choice. You open a door. Now you will stay here forever." Anna knew it was true. The gate had been opened, and she had brought them into the world. The unseen ones were real, and they were here to stay. But as the shadow reached for her, something inside Anna snapped. She couldn't let them win. She couldn't let herself be consumed. Episode 12, The Shifting Echoes. The lingering darkness. Ravenswood had become a town of shadows. What was once a place full of life, with its bustling streets and familiar faces, had now been reduced to an eerie, lifeless void. The radio tower that loomed over the town like a giant, dark sentinel had grown more menacing with each passing day. The whispers in Anna's mind, once faint and fleeting, were now constant, echoing from every corner, every shadow, every heartbeat. Her reflection in the mirror was no longer her own. The face staring back at her seemed foreign, as if it belonged to someone else. A pale, haunted version of herself. The weight of the past weeks had taken its toll. The unseen ones, the voices, the entities from the other side, were all closing in. The door had been opened, and now there was no going back. Anna hadn't heard from Dr. Blackwell in days. His warnings echoed in her mind, but now they felt like nothing more than distant memories. The sacrifice he had spoken of, she still didn't understand it fully. What could she possibly give up to stop the creeping darkness? And was it too late to even try? The clock ticked slowly, its hands moving in a never-ending cycle, and Anna felt as though time itself was slipping away from her. The hum of the radio tower, distant but ever-present, vibrated in her bones, a constant reminder that she had opened something she could never close. She had to make a decision. The time was now. 2. The gate opens again. Anna had spent the last few days locked in her apartment, avoiding the outside world. The town was in chaos. People were missing. Some said they had fled. Others claimed to have seen strange figures in the shadows. But no one had any answers. The town was dying, and Anna knew it was her fault. She had been the one to open the gate. She had been the one to bring them through. The air grew heavier as she approached the radio tower once again. It was late, past midnight, but the darkness was thick, almost suffocating. The wind howled like a wild animal, its cold fingers clawing at her skin as she walked through the streets of the abandoned town. The buildings stood as silent witnesses to the unraveling world, their broken windows like hollow eyes staring into nothingness. As Anna approached the base of the tower, the hum grew louder. It was no longer a distant sound, but a physical force, vibrating in the air around her. The ground seemed to tremble beneath her feet, as though the very earth was reacting to the presence of the radio waves. She wasn't alone. She could feel it, turning. She saw a figure standing in the shadows, barely visible against the backdrop of the tower. The figure was tall, cloaked in a shadow that seemed to cling to its form, its outline flickering and shifting like a mirage. Anna's heart skipped a beat, and she instinctively stepped back. But the figure stepped forward, its movement smooth and deliberate, its presence overwhelming. It was no longer just a shadow. It was real. It was here. The figure's voice was low and familiar, sending a chill down Anna's spine. "You've come back. You know what must be done." It was Blackwell, or at least what was left of him. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow, his features twisted by something Anna couldn't fully comprehend. The man she had once trusted now seemed like a shell, a mere vessel for something far darker, far older. "Blackwell," Anna whispered, her voice trembling. "What have you become?" He smiled, but it was a hollow smile, full of nothing but regret and fear. "I've become what you made me," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper in the wind. "We all become something we never intended. Anna, you opened the door, and now we all must face the consequences." Anna's mind raced. She couldn't stop this. She couldn't turn back now. But she had to know the truth. What was happening? What had she done? "The gateway," she said, her voice shaking. "What happens if I close it?" Blackwell's eyes darkened, and for a moment, Anna saw something behind his gaze, a flicker of something human. But then it was gone, replaced by the cold, calculating stare of something else. "You can't close it, Anna," he replied. "Once the door is open, it's open forever. There's no going back." Anna's breath caught in her throat. "Then what am I supposed to do?" Blackwell stepped closer, his shadow swallowing her whole. "You must sacrifice. You must give up something precious to close a rift. Only then will you stop them from taking everything." Anna's heart pounded in her chest. What was he asking her to do? What did he mean by sacrifice? She had already given so much, already lost so much. But what else could she give? "You must decide," Blackwell said, his voice now a low, insistent whisper. "Who do you love most? What would you sacrifice to stop the end of everything?" 3. The choice. The world around Anna seemed to slow. Time itself seemed to halt as the gravity of Blackwell's words sank in. She had opened the door, and now the world was paying the price. The shadows were everywhere now, creeping through the town, closing in on her, closing in on everything. She looked up at the towering radio station, its massive form a monolith to everything she had unleashed. It was the source of it all, the signal, the rift, the darkness. Everything had started here. "I have to stop it," Anna whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "I have to make it right." But how? What was she supposed to do now? The tower was the source of the chaos, but it was also the only way to close the gate, the only way to stop the shadows from overtaking everything. "You don't have much time," Blackwell's voice cut through her thoughts. "The others are coming. The void is already here. It's only a matter of time before they reach us." Anna's pulse quickened. She could feel the tension building, the pressure growing stronger. She had to make a choice, and she had to make it now. For the last stand, Anna reached out toward the tower, her fingers trembling. She could feel it again, the hum, the pull of the signal, calling her to finish what she had started. Her heart pounded in her chest, her mind racing with the weight of her decision. She could close the gate. She could stop it, but at what cost? Blackwell's eyes locked onto hers. Make the choice, Anna, he urged. Sacrifice yourself, or someone else. Only then can you sever the connection. Anna closed her eyes. I won't let them win, she muttered under her breath. Her hand closed around the switch. She had to do this. She had to make the ultimate sacrifice to end it all, but she couldn't do it alone. With one final, shuddering breath, Anna threw the switch. Episode 13, The Silent Awakening. A whisper in the dark. The night was still, the kind of silence that made Anna's skin crawl. The storm had passed, but the heavy fog had returned, shrouding Ravenswood in an almost unnatural haze. The radio tower still stood, its looming figure casting long shadows over the town. But something was different. The hum, once constant, had faded, replaced by an eerie stillness. It was as if the air itself held its breath, waiting for something. Anna stood at the window of her apartment, staring into the darkness. The signal had stopped. She could still feel its presence deep inside her, a constant pressure that she couldn't escape. It was like a heartbeat that echoed in the back of her mind, reminding her the gate she had opened, the door she had unlocked. She had tried to forget, tried to bury the memory of the otherworldly entities that had slipped through, but the past few weeks had been a slow unraveling. She had learned things she wished she hadn't. The voices from the other side, the shadows, they were all real. They were waiting, watching in the tower. The source of all still called to her. But Anna had made a vow. She wouldn't give up. Not now. The clock on the wall ticked slowly, each second dragging her closer to the inevitable. She glanced at the mirror across the room, but as always, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her from within it. It wasn't her reflection. Anna stepped away from the window, pulling the coat tighter around her shoulders. She needed answers. The signal had to be stopped. There had to be a way to close the rift, to end the madness before it consumed everything. But the more she searched, the more the darkness seemed to stretch, pushing her toward the edge of reason. She couldn't do this alone. 2. The gathering shadows. The door to her apartment creaked open, and Anna turned quickly, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't expecting anyone, not tonight. But standing in the doorway was Dr. Blackwell, his gaunt face shadowed by the flickering light. Anna, he said, his voice low and urgent. You've come far, but you're not finished yet. Anna's breath hitched. She hadn't seen him in days, not since the last encounter at the radio tower. His appearance hadn't improved. His face was even more drawn, his eyes sunken and hollow. There was something wrong about him, something that felt alien, like he wasn't fully there. What are you doing here? Anna demanded, stepping back, her mind racing. You told me it was too late. You told me there was no going back. Blackwell's eyes darted around the room, as if checking for something. I was wrong, he said, his voice strained. We've all been wrong. Anna narrowed her eyes. What do you mean? Blackwell took a slow, deliberate step forward. The rift, it's not just a doorway to their world, he explained, his voice trembling with fear. It's a beacon, Anna, a signal that's been growing stronger, pulling more and more of them through. Anna's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean more? Blackwell looked away, as if ashamed. I thought we had time. I thought the gate would close on its own, but it didn't. It's not just an opening. It's a bridge, a portal between worlds, and it's only growing wider. Anna's mind raced. The implications of his words were clear, and they terrified her more than anything. The gate wasn't just a mistake. It was an invitation, one that had been answered. What do we do now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Blackwell looked at her, his expression bleak. We have to go back to the tower. We have to destroy the source of the signal. If we don't, if we let it continue, everything will be lost. 3. A dangerous journey. They didn't waste any time. The fog had thickened, enveloping Ravenswood like a suffocating blanket. Anna and Blackwell walked in silence, their footsteps the only sound in the oppressive quiet. The streets were empty, the houses dark. It felt like the town was holding its breath, waiting for something. As they approached the base of the tower, the hum began again, louder this time. It wasn't just a sound, It was a presence, a force that vibrated through the air, shaking the ground beneath their feet. The closer they got, the stronger it became, until it felt like they were being pulled toward it, drawn in by the power of the signal. Anna could feel the cold crawling over her skin, the shadows following her every move. The tower loomed ahead, its towering structure casting long, twisted shadows over the ground. The air felt thick, charged with energy, as though something was waiting just beyond the reach of her senses. "It's here," Blackwell whispered. "The doorway is open, and they are coming." Anna's heart pounded in her chest as she looked up at the tower. The door was wide open, the gates to another world hanging ajar. She could feel the pressure building, a weight she could barely bear. The ground beneath her feet felt unstable, as though the earth itself were crumbling away. "We have to stop it," Anna said, her voice trembling with determination. "We have to close the gate before it's too late." Blackwell nodded, his face grim. "It's not just the gate that we have to close, Anna. The signal itself is what's keeping it open. We have to sever the connection. If we don't, they will keep coming." Confronting the darkness, they reached the base of the tower, and Anna could feel the presence grow stronger. The shadows were everywhere now, moving like living things, swirling in the corners of her vision, closing in on her. The air felt thick, like a storm was brewing, and Anna's skin prickled with an unseen energy. She stepped toward the tower, her hand trembling as she reached for the door. The moment she touched the cold metal, a flash of light exploded from within, and the hum of the signal intensified, filling her mind with a deafening noise. The darkness responded. Anna was thrown back as a force surged outward from the tower, knocking her to the ground. The air around her crackled with energy, and she could hear the whispers, louder now, like a wave crashing over her, pulling her deeper into the void. Blackwell was at her side in an instant, pulling her to her feet. "It's not over yet," he shouted over the roar of the signal. "We can still stop it." Anna nodded, though doubt gnawed at her insides. The force of the signal was almost unbearable, like the very fabric of reality was being torn apart. She had to hold on. She had to finish this. V, the final choice. Anna stepped forward again, this time with a renewed sense of purpose. The tower was calling her, and she knew what she had to do. She could feel the unseen ones waiting, their eyes upon her, their hunger endless. Blackwell reached out, his hand gripping hers. "It's not too late, Anna," he said, his voice desperate. "We can still close the rift." She looked into his eyes, searching for something, some sign of hope, but all she saw was fear. Fear what they might face. Fear what they might lose. The signal pulsed again, and the ground beneath them trembled, a deep, resonating hum that shook the very foundations of the world. Anna closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and stepped forward. Episode 14, The Unraveling Signal. Into the abyss. The cold wind howled as Anna stood at the base of the radio tower, the towering structure looming before her like a dark sentinel. The faint hum of the signal still buzzed in the back of her mind, a constant reminder of the rift she had opened, the thin veil between worlds that had started unraveling. It had been weeks since she and Blackwell had last attempted to stop it, but each day the signal grew stronger, pulsing louder like a heartbeat in the distance. The town was barely recognizable now. People had vanished, and those who remained were growing more and more frantic. No one spoke of the tower, no one dared to. It was as if the entire town had accepted the truth. The end had already begun. Anna's heart thudded in her chest. She felt it. The presence. The others. They were here, in the shadows, just beyond her reach. Watching. Waiting. The more she tried to ignore them, the stronger their pull became. But this was it. She had to finish what she had started. She could feel the pull of the tower, the electricity in the air, the vibrations that came from the depths of the earth. The signal was alive now, sentient, calling her forward. Every time she thought about walking away, the world around her seemed to close in, as if there was no escape. Turning back wasn't an option anymore. 2. The gate reopened. The door to the tower creaked open as Anna approached, the cold metal of the handle biting into her palm. Inside, the familiar hum was louder, the static in the air more palpable than ever. The flickering lights overhead cast strange shadows across the walls, twisting the shapes of objects into unnatural forms. It wasn't just the radio equipment anymore. The entire room had become a conduit, pulsing with energy, a link between the world Anna knew and the world that was trying to break through. The gate she had opened was wide now, an undeniable force that threatened to consume everything in its path. As she stepped further inside, the door slammed shut behind her with a deafening bang. The tower felt alive now, and Anna knew that the others were inside with her. She could feel their eyes on her, their presence pressing in from all sides. She had no time to waste. She had to find the source, the heart of the signal. Only then could she close the rift, stop the tide from consuming everything. But the further she walked, the more she realized that it wasn't just a simple machine anymore. The tower itself had become a gateway, and the walls around her seemed to bend and twist, warping reality with each step. The sound of footsteps echoed behind her, but when she turned, no one was there. The whispers grew louder, overlapping each other until they were a constant din in her ears. Anna, her name was whispered from the shadows. A voice like silk, soft and yet filled with a terrifying urgency. She spun around, heart racing, but again, there was nothing, just the pulsating hum of the signal, the cold, oppressive air. But the voice was real. She knew it was. It was here, waiting, watching her every move. 3. The pulse of darkness. The room ahead was bathed in an eerie red light. The walls were lined with equipment, wires, metal, and machinery that didn't seem to belong in this world. It all hummed, like a living thing, a creature of the night feeding on the signal. Anna stepped forward, her pulse quickening. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was following her, something that hadn't shown its face yet, but was waiting for the right moment. And then, as if sensing her thoughts, the tower responded. The machines shifted, the hum growing louder and more intense. The lights flickered again, casting long shadows on the walls. Anna felt her skin crawl, but she couldn't stop now. Her hand reached for the control panel at the center of the room. The buttons were cracked, the screen flickering with faint static, but there was something there, something familiar. She pressed a button. The room went dark. For the awakening, a low growl resonated from deep within the tower, vibrating to the walls, the floor, and into Anna's very bones. She tried to move, but her body felt paralyzed, as though the very air around her had thickened into something solid, holding her in place. The hum of the signal had stopped, but in its place, something darker began to stir. Anna could hear them now, the voices, the ones she had tried to shut out. They were no longer whispers. They were clear, strong, urgent. We are coming. You cannot stop us. You opened the door. You invited us in. Anna's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the presence around her. The others, they were here, in the shadows, in the very air she breathed. She could sense their hunger, their desire to cross over into the world she knew. But what scared her more than anything was the sudden realization. The signal had never been a doorway. It had been a beacon, and they had been waiting for her to turn it on. V, confronting the shadows. The air in the room shifted. The walls creaked, groaned, as if something enormous was stirring within them. The shadow in the corner of the room deepened, a shape forming from the darkness. Something ancient and hungry, its eyes glowing with malevolent intent. Anna could hear its voice in her mind, louder now. It wasn't speaking in words. It was feeling, sending a message that bypassed her thoughts and went straight to her soul. You cannot run for what you have brought into this world. Anna took a step back, fear flooding her chest. What are you? The shadow's form shifted and it stepped closer. We are the forgotten. We are the voices and the static. You called to us, Anna. You opened the door, and now you will be part of us. Anna's eyes widened in realization. The figure was no longer just a shadow. It had shape now, and with each step it took, the air around her grew colder, denser. You cannot close it, the voice whispered, now in her ear. You cannot stop us. You have become one of us. 6, the final choice. Anna felt the weight of the decision bearing down on her. She couldn't stop it. She couldn't stop them. But she couldn't let them take her either. She wasn't alone anymore. The voices, the shadows, they were all around her. They had found her, just as they always would. And now, they would take everything from her. But there was one thing she hadn't yet tried. The switch. Without thinking, she reached for it. The moment her fingers touched the cold metal, a blinding light filled the room, and the hum of the signal returned, louder than ever, shaking the very foundations of the tower. The figure in front of her screamed, a sound that tore through her mind like a blade. But Anna didn't stop. She pressed the button. Episode 15, the final frequency. The last transmission. The air inside the radio tower was thick, charged with energy Anna couldn't explain. The signal had grown unbearable, its hum vibrating through her chest, her mind. It was no longer just a sound. It was a force, something that pulled at her very soul. Anna had come so far, endured so much. The shadows, the voices, the inexplicable horrors. Their presence had never been stronger. Each passing moment felt like a countdown, the ticking clock echoing in her ears, growing louder and louder with each breath. And yet, despite everything, she felt a sense of finality, as though this moment, this hour, was a conclusion of something far larger than herself. The walls around her seemed to pulsate, the faint glow from the machinery casting distorted shadows that danced around her. She could feel them now, the unseen ones, waiting in the corners in the static, in cracks of reality. The hum from the tower had become an insistent pull, demanding that she do something, anything, to stop it before it consumed everything. But she couldn't. The more she tried to resist, the stronger it became. The signal was no longer just an external force. It had infiltrated her thoughts, her very being. She had opened the door, and now she was bound to it, connected to the frequency that held this world and the next together. Anna stood before the control panel, her fingers hovering above the final switch. The rift had torn open fully now, the two worlds intertwined in an inescapable dance. The others, the ones who had been watching her, whispering to her, tormenting her from the other side, had become stronger, more tangible, and their hunger had only grown. With each passing second, the static grew more intense, the walls vibrating like they were on the brink of collapse. The signal was reaching its peak. If Anna didn't act now, it would be too late. The worlds would merge, and nothing, no one, would be left untouched. She thought of Blackwell's warning. The one thing he had told her again and again. The rift can never be closed, Anna. Not fully. Not without a sacrifice. Anna's heart thudded in her chest. She had tried to deny it, to ignore it, but she knew the truth now. The price was inevitable. She would have to pay it, and she would have to choose who would pay it. 2. The sacrifice. The weight of the decision crushed her. Anna's mind raced as she gazed at the flickering panel before her. The once vibrant radio tower was now a twisted, monstrous thing, its machinery pulsing with unnatural life. It wasn't just a tower anymore, it was a beacon, a doorway to the other side. It had been built with one purpose: to connect, to invite, but to close it, to sever the connection once and for all, would require something more. A sacrifice, the kind that would tear apart everything Anna had once known. Something precious, something irreplaceable. She had thought she could walk away from this, that there was a way to stop it without giving everything up, but there was no escape anymore. She had played her part in this twisted game, and now it was time to pay the price. The whispers returned, louder this time. They were no longer just in her ears. They were in her thoughts, in the very air around her. You can't run. You can't hide. You've opened the door. Now we claim what is ours. Anna's hands trembled as she reached for the switch. The sound of her breathing was deafening in the stillness of the tower. The shadows shifted, their forms becoming clearer, more distinct. The others were here, waiting for her to make the final move. The tower seemed to stretch, bending with unnatural angles. Reality was warping around her, and Anna knew, deep down, that she had no choice. She could stop this, but not without losing everything. She could sever the signal, close the rift, but at what cost? 3. The choice. Anna took a deep breath, steadying herself. She had come this far. She had walked through darkness, faced monsters both real and imagined. She had lost friends, lost time, lost herself. But she hadn't given up. Not yet. She looked at the switch, her finger hovering over it. It was an impossible choice. The signal could be stopped, the rift could be closed, but there was a price, the ultimate price. The others were all around her now. She could see their forms clearly, shadowy figures moving in and out of light, their eyes glowing with insatiable hunger. They had waited for this moment. They had waited for her to make the choice. "Close it," one of the voices said. "Close it and take your place with us." Anna swallowed hard. She couldn't let them win. She couldn't let them take over. She had to stop this, even if it meant giving everything up. She thought of her family, her friends, the life she had before all of this began. She thought of the people still in Ravenswood, the ones who were waiting for a savior who would never come. Anna clenched her jaw, staring at the switch. She would not give in. She would not let the darkness win. With a final breath, she slammed her finger down. For the final transmission, the world around Anna exploded into blinding light. The signal roared like a hurricane, deafening her, shaking her to the core. The voices screamed, but they were no longer whispers. They were roars, full of rage and agony. She could feel the energy rip through her, tearing her apart. But Anna held firm. She didn't waver. The shadows surged toward her, their forms writhing as though they were alive, each one fighting to claim her. But she stood her ground, her eyes locked onto the switch. She had to finish this. Suddenly, the light flashed. The hum from the tower grew louder than ever, a deep, guttural sound that resonated through the very fabric of reality. The shadows screamed in unison, their forms dissipating into the air as the signal shattered. Anna felt the connection snap. The rift was closing, slowly but surely. The shadow figures were retreating, their forms dissolving into the void from which they had come. The light from the tower began to fade, the hum subsiding into nothing. And then, finally, silence. The aftermath. The silence that followed was overwhelming. The pressure that had been building for so long, the constant hum, the whispers, the crushing weight of the signal, was gone. Ravenswood felt different now. The distorted, unnatural feeling had lifted, and the world felt like it was beginning to return to normal. But Anna knew the truth. The world would never be the same again. She had closed the gate. She had stopped the rift. But at what cost? She had given up everything. Her past, her future. She had severed the connection between the worlds. But in doing so, she had lost a piece of herself. As the sun rose over Ravenswood, Anna stood before the radio tower, its once imposing figure now silent, still and lifeless. The nightmare was over. For now. But Anna knew better than anyone. The darkness never truly goes away.